Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to see you, as always, today for a very timely Wolverine Caucus topic. When we plan these forums, we're not always aware 8 months out what will be news at the time the forum takes place. But boy, did we time this one right. So I wanted to thank some particular folks in the audience today for being here with us. Representative David Nathan and former Lieutenant Governor John Cherry has joined us, and President Brent Knight from the Lansing Community College, Anthony Harvey from Rep. Bauer's office, Tim Micklin, Rep. Geis's office, and Carissa Chabot and Caleb Nightingale from Rep. Bauer and Rep. McBroom's office, and John McCausey from Senator Mike Green's office, Julie Vogel from Rep. McCann's office. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. You know, there was a woman who came to the Wolverine Caucus forums for 18 years. Her name was Kay Humes. I think most of you knew Kay Humes, and sadly she passed away recently. But in her honor, we have some of the many items that, as a very enthusiastic alum, she would always bring to the forums. So in Kay's honor, we have some of those items on the back table, and encourage you to take one before you leave today. And also, we want to thank MGTV for filming this forum. It's always appreciated that months later people can still learn about our very timely topics. And our sponsor, the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan, and Kirk Lutz is here with us today as well. You know, a wise person once said that every person born has a unique value to the whole of humanity. And that is no more true, obviously, than with the census count. For every man, woman, boy, and child is important in the city, the village, the state that they live in. And we have a former community partnership specialist here with us today, Deshandra Johnson, who once told me that every one of us is worth $10,000. So of course I believe I'm worth more than that, but, but every one of us matters, and every person counted means that there is more of everything for that state, be it financial or social. And so today we're pleased to have a foremost speaker who will tell us about what the 2010 census numbers mean now for Michigan. And to represent him, we have the great member of the 11th District of the House of Representatives, State Representative David Nathan. Please join us today. And we thank his aide, Deshandra Johnson, for being here with us today as well. Representative Nathan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. You guys didn't eat? Huh? Oh, that's why you're a little mild, a little sleepy now. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be in the presence of the former Lieutenant Governor Cherry. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank everyone else for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to come and introduce a gentleman that has done a tremendous lot of work in this area. I think, as you all know, the census data has just come out a few weeks ago. And from the area that I represent, the city of Detroit, we have lost a considerable amount of population. The census data that I've looked at indicates that a lot of the folks that left the city of Detroit moved to other parts of the state. So I believe that our state is more diverse. So we need to make sure that we represent the state and the diversity that the state has moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the speaker, Mr. Farley. On March 22nd, 2011, the Census Bureau released the detailed population totals and demographic characteristics, concluded from the 2010 census. Now the border discussions begin about the implications for the future of Michigan cities and economy. Professor Reynolds, Farley, will explore with us the likely changes that will occur and the economic and demographic trends that will reshape the state of Michigan. In light of this new data, please join us for a very enlightful and long-awaited discussion. Give a wild, excuse me. Give a round of applause, please, for Mr. Farley.
Thank you very much, Representative Nathan. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor made me nervous.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Demographers do get excited about once every 10 years. Actually, we get concerned about how the census is going to be taken, and I thank you. Michigan had a pretty high male response rate. It was not the highest in the nation, but it was higher than most other Midwestern states, so we did a good job in sending our forms back. On the other hand, last December, when Bob Groves from the University of Michigan, but now working for President Obama as the director of the Census Bureau, made his announcements of the state population, he announced that Michigan had a population of about 9.9 million people a year ago last April. That meant that Michigan was the only state in the Union to lose population in the last decade. And frankly, that's pretty unusual. Since 1900, we've had 11 censuses, roughly 50 states, so there are more than 500 census-to-census changes in population, and only 25 times did a state lose population. Many of those were the Great Plains states during the Depression decade. Population size does not necessarily determine prosperity. Most of us would agree that if the next census counts only 9.3 million of us here in Michigan, but our incomes are 15% above the national average, our poverty rate is much lower than that national average, and our college completion rates are much higher than the rest of the nation, we'd be very well off. Unfortunately, the current trends do not point in that direction, and population loss is often taken as a symbol of something that is a problem, either poor governance or some other problem, economic trends adverse in the area. And indeed, population decline may discourage investors from coming into an area. Detroit lost a record amount of population, more than any other city in the entire country. Wayne County lost more population than any other county in the country. And the Upper Peninsula now has a population that's lower than it was in 1910. I hope that the current population trends provoke a discussion of whether we want to encourage population growth. In a developed economy, population growth is ordinarily a very strong stimulant to more economic growth, since you need more homes, and businesses will likely come to places that are growing. Let me be very brief in going over a little bit of the history. The French, when they came to Michigan, very few French came, very few British came. And when the U.S. first took over Michigan, very few people came from the East Coast because it was extremely hard to get here. The Erie Canal was completed in 1825, a little bit of immigration at that time, and then the federal government completed the locks at Sault Ste. Marie in 1855, and Michigan started to be a developed state with a growing population. The swamps were drained. By the time Abraham Lincoln ran for president, Michigan was well connected to the national network, and the population started to grow. But basically, there are two periods in which Michigan's population grew much more rapidly than the population of the entire nation. One was the early decades of the last century. Michigan had been established as a manufacturing center by 1890. The white pine forests were used to make all sorts of manufactured products. Detroit became a center for the steel industry, the iron industry. By 1890, Detroit was the leading pharmaceutical center in the entire United States and one of the leading tobacco centers. So there was this large industrial base. And even today, if we drive around to the smaller towns in southern Michigan, mid-Michigan, we find factories that date from the late 19th century as the state became an industrial power. When the automobile when Henry Ford perfected not the invention of the automobile, but the mass production of a very durable car that sold widely, Michigan became the center for the international automobile industry. And from 1900 to 1930, the state's population grew extremely rapidly, and Detroit became the fourth largest city in the entire United States, behind Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. Detroit has since fallen in rank to a much lower point. The Depression decade was one of slow growth for everybody, every place in the United States. Immigrants stopped coming, fertility rates fell to record lows. Michigan was no exception, although our population did grow a bit in the Depression decade. Then we had a period that sometimes is less recognized for population and economic growth, really from 1940 through about 1970. Detroit became the true arsenal of democracy in the 1940s, and we defeated the German and Japanese dictators, in large part because of the productivity of Detroit's workers and the many munitions that were made in Detroit. This meant that the population grew in that decade, but it's easy to overlook how rapidly Michigan grew economically and in terms of population from the end of World War II through about 1970. There was a pent-up demand for manufactured products at the end of World War II. Most of the southern counties of Michigan had large numbers of manufacturing industry, large numbers of manufacturing jobs, and employment boomed in these areas. Population boomed, and Michigan's share of the national population increased. Now this has got not that way. Doing this wrong. Is there a different strategy? I'm sorry. You got us. Okay, I'm going to get some help here in just a second. Better get some help here in just a second. Can I do it over here? I am stuck again, I am sorry to say. I can't seem to advance this. Thank you.
Just use the arrow.
Oh, okay, that will work. Thank you.
Make screws batteries. Let me go get.
Let me go on with my story while we're working on this. Michigan grew to be about 4.4% of the national population in 1970. That was Michigan's peak share of the national population. 1970 came along, 1973 really. The ministers of the oil-producing countries decided that there would be a limit on how much oil was sold to the Western world. Energy prices increased. That's not the sole reason for a turnaround in Michigan's economic and demographic trajectory, but it is an important consideration. Manufacturers throughout the United States began to look for ways to produce their products at much lower costs. So there were not so much, there were some reductions in manufacturing output, but the story is not really one of reductions in manufacturing output. The story is a much greater efficiency of labor, using machines to replace men who had been making various demographic products. So we saw a succession of rapid growth in Michigan linked to the changing economy. Michigan has grown more slowly than the nation since 1970, virtually no growth in Michigan in the decade of the